and this is my final presentation on a case analysis I did on Roar Digital, MGM's bet on sports betting. So first off, a little background. Nevada basically would have a monopoly on sports betting for many years. Now, why is that? How did they get it? Because in 1992, Congress passed the Professional and Amateur Sports Participation Act, otherwise known as PASPA. It was passed because legislators and sports leagues were growing a little weary of the potential effect of sports betting nationwide, and so they kind of wanted to condense it and allow basically only the ones that were currently running it to be able to. So this allowed 4 states to offer legalized sports betting, which included Nevada, Delaware, Oregon, and Montana. But of those 4 states, only Nevada really could offer virtually any legalized bet, while both Delaware and Montana could really only offer parlays and wagering pools, just kind of small, limited options. And Oregon really never got sports betting off the ground. They never offered anything. So basically, of all those 4 states, if you wanted to really make any kind of sports bet, you pretty much had to do it somewhere in a Nevada casino. So because of that, sports betting handle and revenue would increase in Nevada. So numbers from Nevada came from 1991. 5.8 million was won by Nevada casinos in sports betting in the entire state, and that was the year before PASPA came out. So in 2001, that number went all the way up to 9.4 million was won, and then in 2007, 12.8 million was won by Nevada casinos in sports betting. But how would this help MGM? So for MGM Resorts, what does this mean? So if you wanted to make a sports bet, MGM properties in Las Vegas were really some of your only options. Especially like in the early 2000s, early 2010s, like MGM was expanding, they were acquiring companies, they were becoming, bigger and bigger. So more and more sports betting options were really only at MGM properties, in Las Vegas and some other options across, in the state of Nevada. The other big thing is this also allowed MGM Resorts to offer packages, parties, events for gamblers to come to Las Vegas to watch big events such as the Super Bowl, March Madness. This provided additional revenue, branding exposure for MGM properties, and kind of, one of the big things, sports and sports betting usually were starting to go hand in hand, and you really only could do that in the state of Nevada, so MGM Resorts was able to take advantage of that. However, there would be business interruption, and there were 2 major changes that happened in sports betting. The first one would be PASPA was repealed in 2018. New Jersey had challenged it in the courts. New Jersey had been kind of upset that they weren't able to launch sports betting and that they were frozen out of the first agreement in 1992. So they actually passed a state amendment in 2011 to legalize sports betting within the state, but the courts had struck it down because it was technically illegal still at the federal level in the state of New Jersey. So then New Jersey decided just to challenge PASPA altogether as unconstitutional in 2017. And that case was brought all the way up to the Supreme Court in 2018, where it was heard, and by a 6-3 vote, it was deemed unconstitutional, so PASPA was repealed. This meant that pretty much any state could offer legalized sports betting if that state wanted to. So now, Nevada was not the only one to offer sports betting. Pretty much any state could if the state deemed it so. The second major interruption was that mobile and online betting had started to arrive. It became more prevalent, allowing bettors to make bets in more areas than just the sportsbook. As of 2010, stations, casinos, as well as another company called American Wagering built sports betting apps. They saw cell phones was becoming more and more popular. The internet on cell phones were becoming better. And so they were starting to take advantage of building applications to allow sports betting on those apps. American Wagering would pretty much be bought by William Hill the year after that. And so William Hill had already kind of started to become a major player in the sports betting world due to their sports betting applications. So, people wanted to be able to bet anywhere, so you didn't have to just be at home. You could make a bet on your app as long as you had an account. So obviously MGM had to come to some responses to that. So what did they do? So their first response was building an application called Play MGM in 2017 with the help of IGT. And notice I said 2017, so they were pretty much 7 years behind when the first apps were being built. So they had, wasted a lot of time and let other players start to build more apps where they didn't start to have one up and running until 2017. Unfortunately, the app they built was kind of rushed. It wasn't that great. Users have panned it as unfriendly, as not as good as the others. So even though they finally got an app to the market, most people didn't use it because they didn't really like it. So MGM realized they had to go back to the drawing board. So they hammered a second response. And that second response was partnering with a company called GVC Holdings out of Europe and forming a 50-50 joint venture with GVC to create a company called Roar Digital. This happened in July of 2018. And Roar's focus was that they were only going to be responsible for everything sports betting underneath the umbrella for MGM Resorts and GVC. So the point of my case study is this the best decision for MGM Resorts? Is the partnership with GVC the best way forward for them to compete? Should they have not given up on going it alone? Should they have tried something else? So as we'll see in the analysis forward, like pretty much the main question we want to ask, like, is this the best decision for MGM Resorts? So that brings us to our SWOT analysis, the first one being strengths. So we have 3 strengths to talk about. First one is GVC experience. With GVC, they've been a sports betting and operation company since they launched in Europe in 2004. They also have been operating in Latin America since 2011 and Australia since 2014. They have launched numerous sports betting platforms in these countries, and they would use all that knowledge and experience to help MGM launch their own better version of sports betting applications, which eventually would become BetMGM to replace PlayMGM. As GVC saw that sports betting was going to become bigger and bigger in the U.S., they acquired some more European platforms in 2016, 17, 18 to help strengthen their operations. And then their last major thing is they acquired Stadium Technology Group, and they use their software and their platforms to be able to build what is BetMGM. BetMGM, their technology is built from Stadium Technology Group. So the second main strength is the MGM brand. So MGM Resorts is an internationally known brand. They have 13 properties in Las Vegas, 8 properties located across the U.S., and they have 6 locations in various areas of China. So a press release came out in January 2020 from Fortune saying, they had their list of the world's most admired companies, and MGM was on that list. The brand is known around the world for gambling, and many people come from all parts of the world to Las Vegas, as well as to its other regional properties to gamble and enjoy MGM Resorts itself. The last major strength is partnerships. So as GVC and MGM decided how to improve its position, they used BetMGM to partner with various sport leagues and teams to build partnerships that can expand the visibility of the brand and also the betting app. If you go on the BetMGM website, BetMGM is a partner or operator with pretty much every major U.S. sports organization. They have a partnership with Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA, the PGA Tour, Major League Soccer, the WNBA, the NHL, and NASCAR. So basically, this gives Roar and BetMGM the ability to market itself to followers of these sports to help drive traffic and notoriety to its app. So these are their main strengths. Now let's talk about some weaknesses. And probably the main weakness for MGM Resorts is now they are in a revenue split. So before Roar Digital was formed, MGM Resorts ran all of their sports betting operations. And this meant that they were able to keep 100% of all profits made by those sports books. Now with the partnership with GVC, revenues are now split 50-50 as deemed by the partnerships. So while potential losses could be less for MGM Resorts, it also means that any potential revenue gains as sports betting looks to be growing more and more in stature are now be split up. The second biggest weakness is compliance. While Roar is managing the sports betting operations for MGM Resorts, MGM Resorts is still the brand in the focus of any compliance or regulatory issues, and it's their gaming license at risk if any major issues came up. One did come up just recently in July of 2020, where the sportsbook at Bellagio accepted wagers on games that had already started via their kiosk on the property. This caused major issues within the operations about what to do with those wagers, since they did turn out to be winners. In the Las Vegas Review-Journal article that I found on this, Bellagio and MGM Resorts are mentioned in the article, but nothing about Roar, who operates the sportsbooks and kiosk at Bellagio. As well as this, the Nevada Gaming Control Board is also launching an investigation in the matter, which could lead to fines for MGM Resorts. So MGM Resorts is always going to be the face of any compliance issues, regardless of the fact that Roar is pretty much running it, through the joint venture, and it's not all just MGM Resorts. So those are kind of the biggest weaknesses. Let's talk about opportunities. And so we've got three of them. First one is expansion plan. Once Passover was repealed, more states started to offer online or mobile wagering in their states. And Roar has been able to turn BetMGM into a multi-state application where if you lived in Nevada or you lived in New Jersey or other states where the app is legalized, you can place a wager on BetMGM. You didn't have to be in a casino or even in Las Vegas to do so. And as more states allow sports wagering, Roar will be in a position to gain legalization of BetMGM in those states to be able to allow sports wagers. So they'll be able to expand quicker. And one such expansion, as you can see in the picture, is them expanding into the state of Michigan. Since Michigan allowed sports betting January of this year, BetMGM was up and running, in March of 2020. Other methods. So GVC, through its Stadium Technology Group acquisition, was able to convince MGM Resorts to install sports betting kiosk in its U.S. properties. This would allow the property to take sports bets at any hour of the day, even if the sportsbook was closed. And most sportsbooks are open usually somewhere between 8, 9 a.m. till 10 to midnight, depending on what's going on. So even if you wanted to make a sports bet at 2 a.m., if there's a kiosk on property, you could do that. Whereas before the MGM, without those kiosks, if the sportsbook was closed, you couldn't make any sports bets. And the last one would be the MLife integration. So one key feature that was missing from the Play MGM app was that there was no way to earn comps or tier credits by sports wagering. When Roar launched BetMGM, they announced that the ability to earn tier credits through sports wagering would be coming soon to the app. And as of recording this, Roar has created the ability to earn tier credits for New Jersey players through the New Jersey version of their app. And they said that they will be bringing the ability to other states, in the very near future. So those are the opportunities. Let's talk about threats. Obviously, the biggest threat is competition. With Passover's repeal, many new players entered the segment looking for a piece of the pie for sports betting. Major players in the daily fantasy sports arena, FanDuel and DraftKings, they formed partnership with casinos and other operators to be able to offer sports betting in the states that would allow it. With both FanDuel and DraftKings already having a lot of clout with sports fans, it could easily chip away at market share that MGM Resorts currently owns. There's other obviously bigger ones, William Hill, Station, Caesars, who are also big competitions in the field. And just recently, there have been discussions about Caesars potentially buying William Hill and taking them over, which would lead to a massive sports betting operation between William Hill and Caesars, even bigger than the joint venture between MGM and GVC. And then the second big threat is regulation. And so with BetMGM entering more states with its betting application, this means that MGM Resorts and Roar will need to understand the regulations in that state and comply with them in order to avoid any issues or fines. Michigan can ask for different rules compared to Mississippi, compared to Nevada, compared to New Jersey. And so Roar and MGM will always need to make sure that they are, up to date on what those regulations are, so that they, make sure that the compliance team is always up to date and that they're always in compliance. Since obviously when you're not in compliance, could be turning into a really big headache. So now these are kind of the SWOT analysis, and so that brings us to three options that MGM could take based on these things. Three alternatives. So the first one is the status quo. Should they keep the partnership with GVC? As we've talked about, in some of the SWOTs, GVC has been able to help with the launch redesign of MGM Sports back to BetMGM. They've been able to help with the expansion process as other state ramps up their sports betting relations. They built partnerships with other operators in the various sports leagues to be able to provide MGM Resorts with valuable relationship marketing and exposure to help drive more business to that app. The partnership with GVC has also allowed MGM Resorts to transfer some of the risk with sports betting over to them, but obviously they still need to monitor them, and as their gaming license, that would be a risk in any case of compliance issues. The partnership does potentially limit MGM Resorts' revenue in this sector, as they would have to split revenue 50-50 with GVC based on the partnership. So that's kind of the one big negative if keeping the status quo. A first alternative would be to dissolve the partnership with GVC and completely go solo. So now the big reason they would do this is then they would be able to receive 100% of all revenues associated with sports betting, then having to split them 50-50 with GVC. They would then go back to running all the operations again and be more control of how the sportsbook are run and operated than the current setup with GVC personnel overseeing all major decisions and operations with MGM input. They would one of the downfalls would be all the risk then would be fully theirs again, and they might need to have another company design and roll out their sportsbook act, since, as we talked about earlier, BetMGM is built on the Stadium software, which is a GVC company. And if they boot GVC, GVC might tell them they can't use their app, or they might have to pay a fee to be able to use that app. So if they do decide to go solo, they would have to decide on what to do in that area. And then a second alternative would be to fully divest of the partnership with GVC, but basically allow GVC to fully run operations as a licensee. They could basically have GVC pay a fee, annual fee, whatever that could be, to operate anything that has to do with sports betting on MGM property. All of the revenue and risk would then transfer over to GVC, allowing MGM to fade any business disruptions or issues that come with taking sports bet. This would mean that any revenues above any agreement with GVC would be theirs to keep, which means MGM could be making fewer profits if sports betting does continue to trend upwards. One potential other positive is that MGM could reduce its payroll obligations if it would allow GVC to take over complete control, because then the sportsbook employees would then become GVC employees and not MGM employees, what they currently are. So of these three options, I believe that the best solution is to keep the status quo and keep the partnership with GVC. The partnership has provided them many positives so far that will help continue to shape the sports betting operations for years to come. MGM really didn't take sports betting completely serious, at least from a macro level, until it was behind the curve with other companies. The app it developed with IGT, Play MGM, was considered subpar, lacking options compared to others. GVC has spent many years in New York running sports betting operations, so they have experience, product knowledge to be able to use that to help Roar grow, to be able to pick up market share as it allows more, as more states allow sports betting to happen. And then, the partnership with GVC gives basically Roar, which is their main focus, is just sports betting, how to increase it, how to make it better. They can look at operations from a national and global standpoint than just from a Las Vegas standpoint. And as more states allow sports betting, as we talked about earlier, this also means more regulations. And so Roar will be best positioned to be able to understand those regulations, since they will be working hand in hand with all of the state gaming control board operators or commissions. And the last thing, obviously, is letting GVC has let MGM catch up in the sports betting, with BetMGM. The BetMGM app has allowed MGM Resorts to better serve its customers' needs. And the new application is already fixing one of the biggest missing issues from the Play MGM app, in that it will slowly allow all players to earn MLife tier credits with each bet. This will bring it on par with other companies' apps and close one big missing item that the players have asked for. While MGM Resorts will have to split revenues with GVC via Roar, that partnership will help grow these revenues so that MGM's share would be greater than if it did everything on its own. The partnership has already brought in more partners in various sports leagues, which allows greater marketing exposure opportunities, better to build MGM's brand through Roar Digital. So pretty much based on all these items that I just talked about as well in the SWOT, I think their status quo and keeping the partnership with the GVC is the best decision for MGM Resorts as sports betting becomes more and more popular, in the U.S. I believe it's the best way for them to go, and it's the best way to handle both the pros and cons of what sports betting brings. So thanks, everyone. I appreciate you guys listening to my presentation. Hope you guys learned something, and I look forward to listening to everyone else's and learning something myself. Thanks, everybody.